Today, we're going to talk to Matt Miller about how he built a side business that allowed him to escape corporate America. He's been quite intentional in the choices he made throughout his life so he can enjoy abundance. Welcome to Richer Soul, your journey to a more purposeful, amazing, intentional life. Where are you going to go and how are you going to get there? Let's figure that out together. At the core is the financial well-being to be able to do what you want, when you want, how you want. It's about personal freedom and abundance. Please do check out the Facebook page, facebook.com/richersoul. That's where I share interesting articles that I've read. Also, if you visit the website, richersoul.com, there's a box on the right where you can sign up for my email list. I don't send out emails very often, but if there's something important or some bonus materials, that's the best way to hear about it. Please take a moment to sign up. I plan on releasing an ebook to my followers later this year, and that will go to all the people who are subscribed to the email list for free. Are you creating the life you deserve? Today, we're going to talk to Matt and learn exactly how he has done that for his family. Matt runs a successful vending business, and he is now branching out into franchising his business model. Matt is able to achieve tremendous success. Let's learn how. Welcome to Richer Soul, Matt. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me on, Rocky. I'm excited to be here.
It's a pleasure, and I'm excited that you're here as well. So let's start at the beginning. When you were growing up, what were the money conversations like, and how did you learn to be financially savvy?
I got to be honest with you, I don't really ever recall money conversations. In fact, it's kind of interesting. For whatever reason, in my background and family upbringing, it was almost taboo to talk about money. I don't quite know why that is, but those conversations have always been pretty difficult when it comes to my family. My wife's family, completely different story. We talk about everything. Things are very, very open. But for whatever reason, each of us was kind of on our own, and we did our own thing, and we didn't talk about it and that type of thing. So a lot of my financial education was through experience and trial and error. And to be honest, I'm still learning today because I didn't have a foundation really to build off of except for the School of Hard Knocks and paying a lot of stupid tax along the way.
That is one of the best teachers, right? As long as you listen to the experience.
Right. The downside is that I'm not nearly, or could have been much further along earlier on if I understood some more things and maybe was taught a little bit more as far as thought process. But, it is what it is. And I was brought up for a reason, and I'm just grateful to have the blessings that we have today, to be in the position we're in today, to have a chance to share with audiences like yours and hopefully teach folks some stuff along the way.
That's an excellent way to learn, is from someone else's mistakes. This way you don't necessarily have to go through them.
No doubt.
And so I'm assuming then in school, no real financial education occurred, and then did you go to college?
I remember taking a class about having a checking account at one stage in, I think, high school or junior high, and how to write checks and all that. But that's really the only financial education I had. As far as college, I went to the Air Force Academy for college, was a history major there, went on to be an Air Force pilot for 9 years after graduating. None of that has any direct correlation to business or what I do today with vending and that type of thing.
That's fascinating. It's a typical story. We all go through growing up and we get educations. I have an MBA. They never taught me about money in the MBA, which is hilarious, and how to do those types of things. It's probably why we have so many money problems today in the world.
Well, you think about it, some of the things that we're taught in school these days, none of us are ever going to use. And the basics, like you mentioned, at least in my upbringing, weren't taught, which just doesn't make any sense to me. Basic financial understanding, saving, investing, just some basic things like that you would think should be, and maybe they are part of curriculum today, but they definitely weren't when I was growing up. Whereas things like calculus and some of these other things that I will never use in my life, but I had multiple courses along the way, were requirements for a lot of folks.
That's what I tell people. I say, if you think calculus is important, then sit down and teach it to your kid, because you probably still remember it and know exactly how to use it, correct? And
yeah,
most people can't. Nobody is that guy except the math teacher who keeps using calculus. Everyone else forgets it. That's a shame. You spent a year learning this, and I would probably guess 95, 98% of us never use it. Whereas every day we use money, and unfortunately there's no focus on that. So you get into the Air Force, and you spent 9 years there. And what did you do in the Air Force?
I was a pilot.
So you were flying the fighter jets, or?
I was a T-38 instructor pilot for 5 years, where I taught students how to fly high-performance aircraft in the Air Force. And then my last 3 years, I was a C-5 transport pilot. The C-5 is, at the time at least, was the second largest airplane in the world. When we sat in the cockpit on the ground, we were 6 stories in the air. Pretty massive, massive airplane. I traveled all over the world, delivering equipment, troops, you name it, those last 3 years, and ended up getting out once my commitment was up to Uncle Sam back in February of '98.
That's kind of fascinating. You've seen a good part of the world. What surprised you as you went around the world and met different people and cultures?
I think the thing that, as I've reflected more and more as the years have passed, is how surprised I am how amazing America is and how spoiled we are, and how most of us just don't understand that. Basic things that you and I take for granted in most other parts of the world are not available, or they're a luxury. Ice, as an example, even in Europe, rarely do you get ice in a drink of any kind. Here, if you don't get ice in a drink here in the States, you wonder what the problem is. In fact, I kind of joke with my wife a little bit about some of the nicer restaurants that we occasionally will eat at, and how they don't put ice in my water or whatever. I always end up having to be the one that is requesting it, just because that's how I prefer it today, because I've grown up with expecting that in just about everything I drink. But that's just one example of how spoiled we are and how blessed we are, because that luxury, or that thing that's common for us, is a luxury anywhere else you go. Being able to drink out of the tap is another luxury that in most of Europe, that's available, but I've done extensive traveling in China and that type of thing. And the only water you drink there is out of a bottle, because the water is not fit to drink coming out of the tap. So just basic things that most of us don't even think about are not readily available and prevalent in a lot of other countries and cultures.
Absolutely. I've been to many different parts of the world, and it's true. When you're abroad, you tend to drink bottled water, and things like air conditioning and all of those types of things are not as readily available and easily accessed. And I think from a global standpoint, if you're in the United States and you make $30,000 a year, I think that puts you in the top 1% for worldwide income. And
Oh, no
most
doubt.
people listening to this show, that means you're in the top 1% of the world. So, kind of, what's your excuse? You've got it all.
Yeah.
And that's, I think sometimes we need to have that appreciation of how that goes.
I wish everybody could go abroad for a period of time as part of their training or their education, because I think it would help us all better understand not only what we have, but you know, the way others live, would allow us to be more empathetic and sympathetic. But it would also make us realize that, despite the things that people regularly complain about here, when you put it into perspective compared to other parts of the planet, we've got it pretty doggone good.
We do. And I think, it's funny, when I was growing up, free refills at restaurants was not a thing. If you ordered a soda, you got a soda. And I think back then, though, they put ice in the soda because the ice was cheaper than the soda.
Right.
So you order a soda, it's half filled with ice, which is considerably less expensive, and then they fill the rest with the soda, so they're kind of making a little extra money, and then hopefully you'll pay for a second refill. Today that doesn't matter. Everyone's got unlimited drinks at most places, so
Yeah.
which encourages us to fill up on sugar, which creates a whole lot of health problems.
Right.
So for what is the background of a military pilot? Like, what is it? What types of people? What do people need to become that type of a person and to become a pilot?
I don't know for sure what the ins and outs are today, because the military has changed significantly in the last couple of decades. But back when I was going through school, number one, you had to be medically qualified to fly. And in most cases, even having, needing glasses or having astigmatism or that type of thing made it nearly impossible, to get to the cockpit, no matter how strong a performer you were, no matter how well you did in school, that type of thing. So the medical side of things was number one. And number two was schooling and education. There's a couple different avenues. The most sure way to go on to fly was going to the academy, because such a large percentage of us went on to be pilots. There were many, though, that went, the ROTC route or the officer training school route, and ended up, qualifying later on to go on to pilot training and to be a pilot. A lot of that is based on, the needs of the Air Force at the time. And my guess is we don't fly as many airplanes today as we once did, but we have a lot more drones and that type of thing, which that wasn't even heard of when I was in the cockpit, that I was aware of anyway, to where a lot of our pilots today are sitting in a silo somewhere or a building somewhere flying without ever leaving that location, because they're flying a drone somewhere over in the Middle East or who knows where around the world.
It's constantly changing, and you have to keep up and adapt to that kind of ever-changing world. How long does it take to become a pilot? In other words, how long is the training?
In the Air Force, the program was a year long. There was 6 months at the time in what's called the T-37, and then 6 months in the T-38 or the T-1, depending on whether you were going to be a fighter pilot or you were going to be a transport pilot. Back when I flew, it was just the T-37 and then the T-38. There's even been a lot of change in that. And to be honest, I don't keep track of it, so I'm not sure exactly what the process is today, but it's about a year. And, hundreds of hours of flying, hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours of classroom and one-on-one instruction with your instructor pilot, and in classroom settings. There's just a lot involved, and it's not only book knowledge, but it's also learning hand-eye coordination, learning how to be disciplined when it comes to checklists and following procedures. Airplanes are an amazing thing, but they are very, very dangerous. And if checklists aren't followed, procedures aren't followed, someone can get themselves in trouble really, really quickly. So there's a lot of that kind of training required to teach, the necessity of following those procedures and learning them over and over and over and over again, memorizing many of them that occur in potentially life-threatening situations.
That's fascinating. I look at that and I say, in 1 year, you can go from not knowing very much to being able to fly a fighter plane through intense, immersive training and one-on-one education. And to be able to do that is pretty impressive. And then the second thing I say is, you talk about checklists and systems. You follow these systems, they keep you out of danger, and they allow you to fly these dangerous planes all over quite safely. And it's a shame that we don't have a checklist and a system for life that says, here's how you live life, here's your checklist, this works. Instead, we have to keep crashing and getting up again and trying again. It would be wonderful if someone would create that manual.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a lot of cases, in my opinion anyway, and because of my faith, it's the Bible. But yeah, there's a lot even more practical day-to-day stuff that we could all benefit from having a similar situation for sure. Because there are so many things and experiences that we all share that we could all save ourselves a bunch of time and learn a whole lot along the way from listening to those that have gone before, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think it's Dave Ramsey who kind of mentioned that the number one subject in the Bible is money that's talked about. There's
Right.
a lot of rules and information around that. So you are correct. You have a sense of spirituality, you have faith, and from that you have a guidebook for your life. And that's always nice. It makes life quite a bit easier and allows you a great connection.
No doubt.
So why did you decide to leave the Air Force at the end of 9 years?
I loved what I did, but we had our first child about a year before I ended up getting out, and I was gone all the time flying the C-5. I never knew when I was leaving. I never knew when I was coming home. And though I loved, traveling to and experiencing a lot of different countries around the world, ultimately I got sick of being a pen pal to my wife and my son. And priorities changed once we had kids. And so I chose to make a career move that very few in my position did. Because not only did I leave the Air Force, which many did, but I left flying altogether, which nobody did. Just because I'd kind of been there, done that, got the T-shirt, I knew that flying for the airlines was going to be very similar. I knew that pilots and flight attendants and all that, their track record for lasting marriages was very, very, very poor. And so I made that decision in a lot of ways defensively, because I cared about my marriage, I cared about my child, and wanted to do something that would put us in a position to win as a family over the long term instead of, putting all of that at risk.
And that's quite intentional. You actually looked forward to the outcomes of what was going to happen if you followed the path that you were on, or the similar path that everybody in that situation takes. And yet you said, no, I'm not going to do this, because I see that if I go down this path, my relationships and my family life are going to be horrible, and divorce will take more than half your money. So you looked forward and saw the issues that were there and made intentional choices. So that's impressive. So few people do that. And as you said, so no one does what you did. And when you do what nobody else does, you have a great life instead of just following the path. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
What was interesting, Rocky, is when I was going through the transition out of the military and going through interview after interview after interview with corporations around the country, the biggest challenge I had in those interviews was convincing them that I wasn't going to go back to being a pilot in 6 months after they had invested thousands of dollars in training me. They just didn't see how somebody with the skills that I had, with the experience that I had, would want to do anything different. So you're right. It was so completely different than what most saw or thought. But I was not also the guy that wanted to be a pilot all my life. Most of the guys around me did. They went to the Air Force Academy because they wanted to fly. I literally went there because it was my one shot to go to school away from home. And it just so happened that I was a very well-rounded student. I did very well in high school. I lettered in football and track. I performed in 12 different musicals and plays while I was in school. I was in 3 choirs. I kind of fit the profile of the person, as far as an ideal candidate for the academies. That wasn't intentional. I just loved being active and had a lot of interests. But because of that fact, I literally went to the academy to go to school away from home. And since it was the equivalent of a 4-year college degree, valued at about $250,000 at the time, it was either go to the academy or go to the college at home in Northern Illinois near where I lived, that I had kind of been my playground all the years of my life growing up. And I was ready for something new. I was ready for a new adventure, and the academy afforded me that opportunity.
I'm curious as to why you didn't think you could go to another college somewhere different and away from home.
Well, I mean, I could have, but I would have had to pay for it. And I didn't have the money, and my parents didn't have the money. Mom and dad were both teachers. When I was a senior in high school, we were all a year apart. And they told us early on, guys, if you're going to go to college, you're going to have to figure it out on your own. And that's what I was aware of. That's what ended up, coming up as an option. And man, living in Colorado Springs and maybe doing some stuff in the military sounded appealing to me at the time. And once again, it was a way for me to get my school taken care of when I didn't really see any other way.
Interesting. And so did you leave the Air Force and do all of these interviews, or were you doing interviews while you were still there? So did you have a job when you left?
No, I was doing most of them after I got out. I might have gone to a hiring conference or two while I was still on active duty, but a lot of it occurred, after the fact. There's several different junior military officer hiring organizations that are essentially headhunters for corporate America that are looking for, former military officers. And so I worked with a couple of them, went to multiple hiring conferences. I actually went through about 60 interviews over the span of a couple of months because I really wanted to get a feel for what was available to me and what was out there, because I was so sheltered living in and being a pilot in the Air Force for all that time. So whereas others around me who were exposed to the private sector straight out of college, I wasn't. You know, all of that was decided for me, what I was going to do, where I was doing it, all that was out of my control. That was Uncle Sam's decision ultimately. So there was a lot for me to learn, and I took a lot more time than others might have because I was really looking to find the best fit for me and for my family.
So you were quite intentional during this period. How long did it take you to find the position?
I mean, it was several months, but I mean, I basically had a full-time job interviewing during that time. I got multiple job offers. The first one I got was actually for Michelin Corporation, working in and out of some of the western states, selling tires for huge earth movers and mining equipment. That's the first offer I got. I opted not to follow that one, obviously. I ultimately ended up working for Abbott Laboratories out of Chicago with a territory in the Houston area, selling hospital blood analysis equipment for about a year and a half. And then from there, transitioned into the advertising world, where I ended up staying for a decade before doing my own thing.
Okay, and I think there's a story somewhere along the way with how you performed and you ran into some issues, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I wanted to get out of the military to have more control, and I knew that I could make more money in the private sector than I could in the public sector. What I learned, though, once I got out, is where the military is very predictable, the corporate world, not so much. And the stockholders for publicly traded companies are the priority, not the employees. So the rules were always changing. They were never in my favor. And I got frustrated. In fact, my first full year in the advertising world, I ended up being number 2 in the country out of 750 reps. I was at the right place at the right time and really focused in a market segment at the time that was pretty new to our industry, and was able to, really build a spot for myself very quickly. The downside was that the next year, my boss chose to increase my quota by 96%. The average quota increase in our office was 5 to 10%. Well, so overnight, I go from being, a success that's being talked about all over the company to being a zero and a nobody, and in, fear of losing my job just because of this arbitrary decision that was made by my boss. That decision also cost my family thousands of dollars, put us into a deep hole financially. And I look back today and I realize that that was the impetus. That was the reason why I looked to entrepreneurship. If I hadn't had that happen, even though it was a lousy time in my life, very stressful, I probably wouldn't have started looking for other things, and wouldn't ultimately probably be where I am today.
And that happens sometimes, I think, in the corporate world. People make decisions for reasons of their own, and we get affected. And I think that's one of the things. People think a job is secure. It's probably not so secure, because as the world keeps changing, businesses come and go. And if you run into a person like you did, your income can be dramatically shifted through no fault of your own. Did they not have a process where you could go back and say, hey, why am I being unfairly given this quota?
No, it is what it was, and it's my job just to suck it up.
And they tell you that too, don't they?
Pretty much.
That is corporate America. Suck it up, do what you're told, be happy you have a job.
Exactly.
And that's not always the greatest thing in the world. And that's why, and I think that's going to get worse going forward, just with the changes in technology.
Now, what's interesting with all that, Rocky, which a lot of people will have probably trouble relating to, is even after being treated that way, the job I enjoyed, and it also afforded me a lot of freedom because I was able to work out of the house most of the time. So even after that, I had to suck it up and deal with that next year that was pretty stressful. But then things leveled out after that, and I kept that job for a decade, not because of the money, but because I had freedom to come and go as I wanted. And once I realized that entrepreneurship was ultimately what I wanted to do, it allowed me to get really good and very, very efficient at working with my clients and growing my business in the ad space. But because of my efficiencies, it afforded me additional time on the side to figure out the entrepreneurship thing without sacrificing, my career. And when I left, I was at the top of my game. In fact, it was one of our bi-monthly meetings with the sales team. And when it was wrapping up, I said, hey, to my boss, I said, hey, can we chat for a couple minutes afterward? I submitted my 2 weeks. He was floored. He never saw it coming because I had continued to work hard and perform well in my full-time career. In fact, he thought it might be like a midlife crisis or whatever, and asked me if I wanted to take a sabbatical for 3 to 6 months, get my head straight, and then come back. And I was like, you know what, Eric, I've thought long and hard about this for a long time, and I'm ready to move on. And he actually asked me to stick around a couple of months, not just a couple of weeks, to make sure that the transition of my clients and accounts and all that was a smooth one. So, I mean, it couldn't have been a better transition for me because I wasn't sacrificing my job to do the entrepreneur thing. I was making sure that I was fulfilling my end of the bargain, for the company I worked for first, and then took care of the business stuff on the side.
And that's one of the things we talk about, which is leaping with a parachute. You're jumping out of a job into entrepreneurship, but you've already built up your business. So you don't have to go through the stress of trying to build a business after leaving a job. And I think that's a wise way to do it because it gives you more security, and it also gives you, it's just a much easier transition. Interesting how you talked about work. So essentially, did you created a system that you were able to get your work done faster and more efficiently? Did you have, like, again, going back to the Air Force, checklists or some kind of system in place, or how were you able to accomplish that?
It was more who I chose to work with. There were guys and gals in the office, as an example. They were going after the major corporations, the very complex sales cycles and processes of working with those companies. They enjoyed going out and whining and dining the marketing managers or this person or that person, and over time developing a relationship and ultimately getting that multi-million-dollar sale. I chose to deal purely with entrepreneurs, and that led to smaller clients. But the beauty of working with entrepreneurs is they are busy doing what they do to keep their business running. They don't have time to be wine and dine in most cases. They don't have time for all those extras going to baseball games or whatever. They've got time to sit down, cover what needs to be covered, figure out a game plan, and then let me execute on behalf of them in that game plan because that's what they were paying me to do. So it led to a lot less hassle, a lot less headaches, and more time for me to spend with my family and do what was important to me because they trusted me. I also wasn't just selling them stuff just to sell them stuff. I've been a firm believer since the very beginning of creating win-win scenarios and situations. And whereas oftentimes I was instructed that I needed to sell this product over here because the company has some sales goal that they want to meet, I personally ignored that in most cases and sold my clients what I knew would produce the results that they needed or wanted. And in doing so, that provided very, very, very loyal customers for me that were very low maintenance because they knew that their best interests were my best interests and that I was in it, not just to sell another $1 million or whatever of X, Y, or Z, but to make sure that they made more money off of every ad campaign that I ran than they spent with me. And in doing that, the headaches were minimal. They let me do my thing. We talked only when we needed to talk. Most of the time, it was just over the phone and email. And it gave me a lot of autonomy that others in the office didn't have because they were always going to the next meeting with that marketing person or with that whoever at that major company as they were working this complex sale out to hopefully, be something big at some point down the road.
So were you intentional in that so that you could have time with your kids and family? Because I know that when you have to entertain for sales, it's nice to go to sit in a suite and watch a football game, but after 6 months or a year, it becomes work and it gets quite tedious, especially when you're away for the entire weekend or nights from your family.
I was very, very, very intentional in that. Most people in the office didn't understand why I wasn't the guy using the Astros tickets or whatever nearly as often and that type of thing. It's because I didn't want to play that game. I wanted to be done with work and be home, put in my time, but then do what I wanted to do. And so I chose not to go there. And I didn't make quite as much money as these other guys, but it wasn't about me becoming, a multi-million-dollar performer and making $200,000 with that company. It was about me making enough to take care of my family and our needs so that I could do my own thing on the side and ultimately earn the freedom that I so desperately wanted. So there was a lot of trade-offs. I was called in multiple times, asked to take promotions that I turned down. They didn't understand. I told them, listen, guys, my family's the priority. And because of that, I appreciate your confidence in me, but I don't want to be a manager. I see what my manager has to do in that position, and I want no part of that. And they didn't get it, but that's okay. I wasn't doing it for them anyway.
It takes a lot of fortitude and intention to say no like that. And I think too many people just follow, they're offered an opportunity and they just follow it instead of saying, wait a minute, what is the outcome of this opportunity and how is it going to affect the rest of my life and the other parts of my life? And unfortunately, when they go down that path, they find themselves in trouble because they don't have the freedom and the time and the ability to do what they want. They're stuck kind of working in a situation they probably didn't think through and expect.
I had enough confidence in myself and in my dream of doing my own thing and having control over my time and control over money that I knew that there were going to have to be sacrifices along the way and some very hard decisions were going to have to be made. But that was the only way I was in control over my destiny. And yes, I could have made an extra $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year or more by taking, that promotion or whatever. But it wasn't about the short-term victory. It was about the long-term. And because I kept focused there and kept my family and its importance as the priority, today I can look back with fond memories but have total control over my time and my money.
Absolutely. So let's kind of switch gears. Let's talk about this journey into entrepreneurship. How did that start?
Well, like I mentioned, the decision was made about my quota, and all I had to do was look at the the compensation plan and know that there was no chance anytime soon for me to work my way out of the hole that I was put in. So I started looking on the outside for ways to make money on the side. I sold aluminum cans for a while there, just collecting them at local businesses, and my son and I on the side of the road or whatever. I sold books on Amazon before selling on Amazon was cool. In fact, my garage looked like a library for several years because we just had shelves and shelves and shelves of books that we had picked up at library sales and at Goodwill or, that type of thing. All of those things helped make us money and keep the roof over our head and food on the table. But ultimately, I had read Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, along the way, and I bought into his whole idea of passive income. So I was looking for a way to make money in a passive way, and none of those ways were passive in any way, shape, or form. I had a buddy of mine at church one Sunday mentioned that he had bought a couple of gumball machines with his daughters, and it was something they were doing together, and had placed them in some local area businesses. And I remember that conversation. I couldn't even afford my own house at the time, Rocky, let alone, have rental properties and all that like Kiyosaki talks about. But I quickly realized that a gumball machine is passive income like Kiyosaki talks about. And I could afford a gumball machine. I couldn't afford any of those other things. So I'll never forget, I found a used candy and gumball machine on eBay, bought it from a guy across Houston, so I didn't even have to pay shipping, and loaded up my two oldest kids in my 98 Honda Accord at the time and drove across Houston one Saturday morning. I picked up that machine. We spent about an hour talking to the guy who had done various things in vending for a couple of years, learned a little bit from him, but also learned that he had 19 others in his garage that he was just about ready to list on eBay. And I encouraged him that if he'd hold on to them for a few months, I'd come back and buy every single one of them as I had the cash flow to do it. And that was the beginning of my vending career. We stopped at Sam's Club on the way home, picked up some Skittles and some gumballs, and then the following Monday after work, I went out starting to knock on doors to figure this whole vending thing out. I'd bought a couple of ebooks on Amazon, read up on the types of vending, and realized that bulk vending, which is toys, gumballs, candy, temporary tattoos, that type of thing, though not as flashy and glamorous as some of the other vending, the beauty of bulk vending is the capacity in the machines is much larger. Therefore, the service cycle is much further apart, which meant that I didn't have to spend, all my life worrying about vending machines on top of worrying about my full-time career. And so it allowed me to do both. And over time, more and more machines were placed once I figured that out and came up with the money to do it. And the passive income that was occurring during the day and at night while I was at work or with my family continued to grow and grow and grow. And over a period of years, finally got to the point where it created some options for us and gave me the ability eventually to walk away from the full-time career just to be a full-time entrepreneur.
So at this point, how old were your kids and why did you take them along?
Well, we homeschool. And so as homeschoolers, our philosophy is that every life situation, there's learning in it. So it was an opportunity for them to spend time with Dad, but it was also an opportunity for them to learn something, to learn a little bit about business, to begin to learn a little bit about some of the other opportunities that are out there. So for us, the kids have always been involved because we wanted them to learn something and to gain valuable life experience as mom and dad are learning too. And with vending, it's a beautiful marriage because, kids in most cases are the users of the machines anyway. So it just was a perfect fit. they could be involved. Initially, it was helping fill machines with my youngest, Rebecca. It was her putting quarters in the machines and having fun getting stuff out of them to begin with. But as our businesses grew, the kids took more active roles. In '07 and '08, when I started School Spirit Vending, which is the franchise company that I run and operate today, my son Zane, who was 10 at the time, became our very first graphic designer for SSV because I real quickly saw how expensive graphic design was. And I saw that it would be cheaper for me to buy an iMac and the Adobe suite and then have Zane learn graphic design than it would be for me to be paying professionally trained designers, week after week after month. Zane ended up getting some training from a buddy of mine who was a Hollywood commercial editor and graphic designer in exchange for mowing his yard one Saturday for a couple of hours. And that ended up being his foundation. Today, he turns 21 in September, so a couple months from now. He has literally done design, thousands of design jobs for hundreds of clients. He was recently asked by his university to work in the public affairs department because his work around campus was noticed by the head. And the guy called him in and said, "Hey, where did you learn how to do this stuff?" And Zane told him the story of doing graphic design for his dad's company. He and I actually just had a conversation yesterday where the city that his school is in have reached out to him asking him to bid on the complete revamp and recreation of the city's website, because he's gotten into web design and app design at this point as well. And chances are, because of the references that he's got from instructors and the leadership at his school, that he'll be doing as a college student, will be the designer of the website for Hillsdale, Michigan, where he goes to school. And all of that started because we gave him an opportunity to learn something that he enjoyed doing in mom and dad's business.
That's a very important thing for parents to realize. Your kids can do more than you imagine. And if they're interested in doing something and you allow them to do something, they will grow and they will spend the time, they will dig in on their own and get it done. We had an episode with someone, Jonathan Harris, he does 10K to talent. And that's basically what it is. He talks about getting your kids that 10,000 hours to be an expert in something. Your son's spent 11 years working in this area, and at 21, he's probably at a point where he's got the equivalent of someone who might be 35 worth of experience, and look at how he's going to have an awesome life because of what you allowed him to do.
Right. I'll never forget my youngest, Rebecca, who's 16 here in a month. We were in Sunday school. She was in a class, just because of scheduling at our church at the time, that was kids 1 year older than she was. The teacher, she was 8 years old at the time. The other kids were 9. The teacher asked in the class one Sunday, "So what is it that you love to do to help out your parents around the house?" And all the kids went around and they made their comments. And Rebecca, at 8, in a classroom of 9-year-olds, says, "I love to mow the yard." All the other kids and the teacher all looked at her and said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, I mow the lawn for my mom and dad every week." Well, they couldn't imagine that an 8-year-old who was a year younger than them was mowing the yard when it had never even been brought up as a possibility for them in the households that they lived in. We didn't just let her out on her own, but we went out and we gave her the opportunity to do so. We were there, we monitored and coached and trained her along the way. And after 6 months or so, she was able to go out and do it on her own. But most of us don't give our kids the credit that they deserve. We treat them like kids way too long when they could be learning valuable skills. They could be learning how to be more responsible. because our job is to prepare them for real life. So any and every experience that we have been able to give our kids, we've worked hard to do, not focusing as much on the athletics and a lot of those things that a lot of parents do, because the reality is they're only going to play baseball or football or volleyball for so long. Yeah, they might take it up every once in a while for fun once they become adults, but most of those skills don't translate to adulthood. But a lot of the basics, like we talked about early on about finances and money and all that, well, there's a lot of just life skills that most of us never even think about giving our kids experience in. We live out in the country today. I call it EIEIO. We're in Central Texas. We bought 6 acres. 6.5 years ago, Rocky, I didn't know how to do anything on this land. We've learned how to raise chickens, ducks, geese, hogs. I've got a huge vegetable garden that the family has been actively involved in since we moved here that provides much of our food every summer. We've done all of that intentionally because we were in the Houston area, in the city, when we started our entrepreneurial journey. And most kids sit in the house all summer long playing video games or on the computer because it's so god-awful hot and humid down in South Texas. Well, we didn't want that for our kids. We wanted them to learn. And so we moved. We all have learned together. Now we have a homestead. We're very, very self-sufficient in a lot of ways. Our kids have been prepared. Hopefully they'll never have to use a lot of the skills that they've learned here, but if they have to, they know how to raise chickens. They know how to butcher chickens. They know how to do all kinds of stuff like that because, once again, with intention, we decided what we wanted for our family instead of letting exterior circumstances dictate what our family life was going to be like.
That's awesome. The whole backbone of Richer Soul is actually built on kids. My daughter does a lot of the editing work. When I was doing blog posts, she was rewriting and doing all the correcting, and I'm going to be writing an ebook, and she's the one who's actually doing it. I have all the content for her, but she's the one who's going to write the book and put it all together. And I probably need to get my son more involved in the tech side of the business because he knows how to work on the technology side. The actual editing of the podcast is actually done by a friend of mine's son who's 12 years old. He goes through and he enjoys doing this, and he makes us all sound great at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And the other half of that is kid labor is cheap. It doesn't cost as much. And if you're just starting out and you don't have the money, then that should not prevent you from doing things. Sit down as a family and figure out what are our skills, what do we want to learn, where do we want to go, and be purposeful and intentional and go do it. It sounds like you have consistently been intentional. You've thought through the outcomes. If I take this path, what is the outcome of my life? And you've realized that there are outcomes you don't want, so you make changes.
One of the foundational things to that too, Rocky, is learning along the way not to really care what other people think. Too many of us spend our life trying to please people that aren't thinking about us anyway. And when I was in high school, I ran track and played football, so I lettered in those sports. So I hung out with the jocks, but as I mentioned earlier, being in the musicals as a thespian and being in the choir, talk about 3 completely different groups of people that I ran with. And I learned real quickly to have a thick spine and thick skin because my jock buddies would give me grief and my coaches would give me grief about the musical I was going to be in. And then my thespian friends would give me a hard time about, hanging out with the jocks all the time. And I just learned early on that, what, I'm not doing this for anybody but for me. They're not living my life. I am. Therefore, I don't care what they think. too many of us care too much about what others think. We handcuff ourselves for the lives that we could have because of that, instead of saying, you know what, I'm going to do what's right for me. I don't care what anybody else thinks. And then charting your own course, much of which we've obviously talked about here so far in this conversation. We just decided that we were living our life, not the life of anybody else. And that's made a huge difference for us.
That's a big decision to make. And it's probably a little scary at times to say, I'm not going to follow everyone else. I'm going to do my own thing, and to deal with essentially being ostracized for that. So you learned a valuable skill at a young age. That's impressive. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And I believe along your journey, you've had some coaches to help you, haven't you?
No doubt about it.
Can you talk about what kinds of coaches you've had and how they've helped you?
One of the most important skills that you can learn is self-awareness. I listen to a lot of Gary Vaynerchuk, even though, his language and all that is not the way I live my life. The guy is brilliant despite the way he talks oftentimes. He talks a lot about having self-awareness, knowing what you're good at and pursuing and utilizing those talents, but then also knowing what you're not good at. And over the years, I've learned to stay in my lane as much as I possibly can, and then find others to help me where my lane is not. As our franchise, School Spirit Vending, at the time, it was just a vending company with a distributorship and a licensing model. I realized that the speed of the group is determined by the speed of the leader. And I had gotten stagnant a bit because I had accomplished that goal that I'd always strived for, which was financial independence and working for myself. So there was a few years there where I was just kind of hanging out and I'd gotten comfortable. I realized that in order to keep growing and for the team to keep growing, I needed to get out and get back growing as an individual myself. So I started attending conferences and that type of thing. One of the conferences that was life-changing for me was Dave Ramsey's EntreLeadership, which 3.5 years ago in December I attended in Nashville. Not only did I learn a ton from Dave's organization, but I also met a guy who is a longtime friend of Dave's. He was actually Dave's second advertising client on the radio, a guy by the name of Aaron Walker. And Aaron was just starting his company called View from the Top. He was beginning to do one-on-one coaching. Shortly thereafter, he started some mastermind groups and that type of thing. I got around that guy and I realized here's a guy who's had 35 plus years of business experience, multi-millionaire, been in business since he was 18. He knows things that I don't know, and I need to get around him on a regular basis. So I hired him as a coach. It was under his mentorship and coaching that we became a franchise because he challenged some of my thought process. Since then, I've hired coaches such as a guy by the name of Scott Beebe. Scott has a company called My Business on Purpose. I am not a detail guy. I'm a big picture guy. I'm a visionary. I'm a creator developer. I'm not a get in the weeds guy. Well, Scott came in and helped me put systems and processes in place, helped me come up and develop a mission statement to really nail down the values of our company and who we are and what we stand for. I've always been, though I participated in sports when I was growing up through high school, getting myself to get out of bed, to work out or whatever has always been a struggle. And because of that, I've always weighed more than I should have. Well, about 1.5 years ago, Pat Flynn, in a lunch conversation we had one day, recommended his own personal trainer, a guy by the name of Jeff McMahon. And I hired Jeff 18 months ago. He lives in Cincinnati. I live in Texas. We do virtual training 3 times a week on FaceTime. And then he sends me workouts 2 other days a week. So I have somebody to keep me accountable somebody that I can learn from and benefit from their expertise in an area that I'm weak. I've got a spiritual mentor, a friend of mine who's actually one of the pastors at our church that I meet with every week, and we do a Bible study, just the two of us, and then we keep each other accountable. Why? Because in all of those areas, I know that I need help, and I've been willing to seek that help out. And in the process, I've gotten better and more consistent in those areas that I know, because of awareness of myself, have been weaknesses for years.
And that's one of the things that we need to focus on. You know what your strengths are, and you improve them by constantly growing and learning. You also have to focus on your weaknesses and either get somebody else to handle that work of the weakness or overcome it, in a sense. As you said, you've got a whole handful of coaches all around you helping you to live an amazing life and taking the feedback. Aaron Walker's going to be on an upcoming episode. I'm going to be chatting with him tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. Seems like an amazing guy. We'll hear from him as well. So you had a business, and it was the vending machines. You're servicing them. It's going well. And now you've decided to kind of take it to the next step, which is franchising it. Can you share a little bit about what you do so that if somebody were interested in either starting their own franchise or being involved with you, what it's all about?
So in '07 and '08, Rocky, I had about 125 traditional vending locations and restaurants and nail salons and that type of thing on the north side of Houston. The market tanked. Less people were frequenting my business locations where I had equipment. I was frustrated because I built this pretty awesome business on the side. It was providing about twice the income that my full-time job was, with just some work on nights and weekends. But I was frustrated because of the economy. And right around then, I had several young kids come knocking on my door selling me stuff for the local school fundraiser. And them coming by led me to come up with this whole idea of doing vending in schools, custom designing stickers for those schools with their mascots and their colors, creating a custom machine that gets placed in the school to sell those stickers along with other stuff that the kids are into. That whole idea came from the downturn in the economy. And because I had come from a print advertising background, I knew enough to be dangerous where it came to printing and knew how to tell a graphic designer what it was that I was looking for so that they could put something together for me. And so a good friend of mine who was an elementary PE teacher got me into his school down in West Columbia Elementary in West Columbia, Texas, October of '07. So we're at almost a 10-year point. We put that machine in, tested it. It blew our doors off as far as expectations. And then we set about figuring out how to get our program into other schools. For the first 7.5 years, our team grew by word of mouth and referrals, primarily family and friends and that type of thing, through a distributorship and a licensing model. And then under Aaron's guidance and coaching, 2 years ago this month, we became a franchise. It enabled us to do business in a lot of states in the Northeast and in the Midwest and out West, where the business environment, there's a lot more bureaucracy involved. There's a lot more restrictions and requirements to conduct business in many of those states. So I was counseled, after consulting with my attorney, that the franchise was the way to go. Since we became a franchise 2 years ago, we've added 65 franchisees. We're now in about 43 states. We are absolutely growing like a weed because we've found that there's a lot of people out there who would like to use an already proven business model and have it work for them. They're looking for a business that they can do on the side that doesn't require them to sacrifice their career. They're looking to develop a passive income that gives them options down the road, like it has afforded me and my family. And then there's a lot of folks that are looking to start a business with their kids, and vending is a perfect business to do that. So we've got folks reaching out to us on a daily basis from literally all over the planet, having interest in what we do. I've been humbled by the outpouring and the growth that we've seen for this crazy idea that I came up with about a decade ago, and the ability to help schools out in the process.
It's quite interesting because you take an old school idea, which is vending machines, and you put them into a new marketplace, which is schools, and you help fill a niche because they need to do fundraising, and that's becoming more and more difficult. And you're also at a price point that's quite low. I know I get kids coming to my door, they're like, oh, buy these cookies for $20. And I look at them and go, just take $10. I don't want a cookie. It's so overpriced, and it's a shame what's kind of come of that. And so you found a wonderful niche and a way to do it. I want to run some numbers, and let's just do gumballs, for example. Gumball machine, is it still a quarter? I haven't bought these in years.
Yeah, most places it's a quarter. A machine will cost you, probably $100 new. If you can find some used, you can probably get them for a fraction of that cost. The markup on a gumball back when I was still doing gumballs was about 1,000%. So the margins are incredible. Now, at a quarter a time, it takes a lot of gumballs to help somebody make a big financial impact. But the beauty is the machines are doing all the work, and you can continue to do whatever the heck it is that you do in your career without sacrificing that. Over time, I leveraged the gumballs and then eventually toys and temporary tattoos and all that, leveraged the experience I'd gained there into starting SSV. But there's hundreds, if not thousands, of operators around the country that still do just traditional vending very, very, very successfully and make a great living doing it.
I'm just going to put some numbers to this. If I sell a gumball for a quarter and I sell 500 of them a month, it's $125. If I need to sell 500 gumballs in a month, on a 30-day month, it's only 16 gumballs a day, which isn't very many.
Right.
And at the end of the month, I've got $125. Now, I had to buy 500 gumballs, so that might be $10, whatever the number is. But if I've got 100 of these machines at $125, I now have $12,500 a month in revenue coming in. And $12,500 times 12 is like $150,000 a year. That's impressive. All on a quarter.
Yeah. Now that number, Rocky, is very high as far as an average for a gumball machine. Most gumball machines are going to do anywhere between $10 to $30 or $40 in a month. Most of them at the lower end of that spectrum, but still, you are not having to do any work. The payoff for my machines in most cases was a matter of months. So I could go get another machine, go get another location, and scale this at whatever speed that I chose to do so that fit for me. If people have more time or they've got more money than I did at the time, they can grow much quicker than I did. The reality is you get to a point where just about any income can be passed with vending machines that are doing all the work. You get big enough, you hire people to actually do the day-to-day. So there's a lot of flexibility. It's a great business for people to build on the side because of that. And once again, getting back to our earlier conversation, without having to sacrifice or risk losing it all by leaving a career that's lucrative, you put it together on your own terms. And whether you decide to walk away at some point or just have a killer secondary income stream on top of your corporate career is up to you. I know this, though. As my business grew, I put up with less and less nonsense at work. I was less willing to toe the party line. I was less willing to jump every time my boss said jump because I needed that job less and less as time went on. It allowed me to have much better balance in my life than many others in the office did, because they had to have the job, therefore they weren't willing to say no, or they weren't willing to maybe not volunteer for that extra opportunity because they didn't have any other option.
How did they react when you said no at work?
I did a good enough job to where they just took it at face value and moved on. I mean, I wasn't rude about it, and I always gave them a reason. My reason was always my family. And I always said, listen, guys, I'm sorry, but I've got other responsibilities, and I really can't afford to take on that responsibility here at this time. I love what I do. I'm very good at what I do, as you know, and I'd really prefer just to stay here where I'm at. And they scratched their head. They didn't get it because they were all looking to climb the corporate ladder, and for whatever reason, Matt wasn't. Eventually, they stopped asking because they knew I was going to tell them no. And at that point in time, the pressure was completely off, and I was just allowed to do whatever I wanted to do as long as I was continuing to perform.
That's awesome. And I think if people need to realize we're living in a very different time, I think, now than 30, 40 years ago. I remember when I came out of college, you go to work in Company X and you stay there for 40 years and they hand you a pension and a gold watch. It doesn't exist anymore. If you're going to rely on somebody else for your income, as companies are constantly coming and going, and so you got Amazon and Uber changing the world, it might be time to start thinking about how you can build a side business or a side revenue, especially if you're young, to help you and protect you from possible downturns.
Here was my philosophy. They didn't owe me anything. They could have told me to get lost any day, any time, without any reason. So that gave me permission to not owe them anything except for doing what they asked me to do and doing a good job and giving them my 100% attention while I was at work. But as I continued to perform to the quota or to the levels that they expected me to, because I got more efficient and better at it, because I wasn't letting, if I work another 10 hours a week, I can make another 20 grand this year. I wasn't letting that be a distraction because my career was not going to be the way that I was going to hit the financial goals that I had for myself. It was going to be in my business. So I was able to stay focused and just continue to do my thing as I figured things out on the side, because that's ultimately where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be the next CEO of the company that I worked for. So the need to continue to play the game and give more and more of my life over to that company just made zero sense to me.
Once again, you're intentional and you know what you want and you know where you're going and you achieve it. And that's basic and simple. Not easy to do, but basic and simple. So if people want to find out about getting involved in the vending business with you, how is the best way for them to contact you?
I wrote a short ebook called Live Your Dreams, the top 10 reasons why you need to own a vending business. And it's just some insights that I've gained over the last 13 years in vending, many things that folks probably have never even thought of before. And if they're like me, most adults have never even used a vending machine, let alone thought about making money with them. So there's some real insights there that I think people will learn a lot from, whether they decide to get involved in vending or want to talk about our franchise or not. They can go to ssvbusiness.com/richersoul, RICHERSOUL, and download that ebook for free. And then we can begin a dialogue if they like. If not, hopefully at least I'll make them think.
That's awesome. And thank you for doing that. I will link to that in the show notes so that you can just click on the link and check out the free ebook. Maybe vending's for you, maybe it's not, but it's something that I think everyone should at least take the time to learn more about creating a business, learn more about diversifying your income streams and finding out more information. And this sounds like a low-cost way to get involved in a business. There's tons of other opportunities, but the same basic systems are there. And I'm sure in the book you talk about that. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Rocky. Appreciate the opportunity to be on and share.
Anything as we wrap up, any closing comments or anything else that you'd like to share with the audience?
I just tell folks, listen, guys, you live in the greatest country in the world with the most opportunity in the world. Don't sell yourself short. Don't be foolish, but man, why sell yourself short and just take whatever that boss or that company that you work for and the career that you have today for face value and rely solely on them? You've got every tool available to you today, most of them for free with the technology that's out there today. So figure out something that you can do to provide yourself some options. And if you don't want to work the 40-year plan, you have the ability and the permission to figure out a way to shortcut that like we have.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for joining us today, Matt. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks, Rocky. God bless you, man.
Thank you. I encourage you to check out Matt's free offer. It's at ssvbusiness.com/richersoul. It's also here in the show notes, so it'll be easy for you to find. It's always good to learn about different ways to make money. I enjoyed how Matt has been intentional in his decisions. He gave up money to have time and relationship with his wife and kids, and he ended up with all three. I'd love to hear your questions and any feedback to improve the show. Also, if you hear me say something that's incorrect, please let me know. Thanks for all your support. My email is rocky@richersoul. Have a wonderful week. Look forward to chatting with you next week.